Amei Wallach and Sheri Pasquarella. So I'll start with a very trivial question. As someone in the film says, rumors about this Biennale being rigged were swirling for a long time. When did you realize you wanted to make a movie? And why did you think when did you think you had the movie?
So I wanted to make the movie because, as an art critic for many, 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 many years, I always was interested in the fact that art is engaged in every part of life, and I thought it was important to write about things where it is engaged in life. And I had just made a film about Ilya Kabakov. I think Amelia Kabakov is here, Ilya and Amelia Kabakov, who was the great artist to emerge from the Soviet period. I thought it was very interesting to think about, well, where were we coming from at that time? And I was speaking to a producer, Ruth Charney, and I said, do you have any ideas for a film? And she said, well, I was at the 1964 Venice Biennale. And I thought, that's it. It's the whole story. It's art involved in every part of our lives. And then I saw, though, there was an exhibit of the Ugo Mulas photographs of the paintings being put on a boat. And that's when I knew I had a film.
Oh, is mine on?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Oh, hi. One of the things that really struck out to me about the film. Oh, actually, you know what? I'll start with a basic question, as Giulia did. We had a conversation just before the film came on that I found really interesting about who you envisioned as the audience for this film and how that fed into your motivation and thinking as you made it, how it took form. Can you share that?
Well, I mean, I knew that, we were all going to want to see this film. This is our lives, and these are things we knew about. But I really hoped that younger people would come to the film as well, and they have been, which is quite wonderful. But also, for younger people, as my husband Bill said, this time was the way the First World War was for us.
Yeah.
It's so far away. And that really meant that I had to explain a lot. And it was very important to be able to explain a lot in a way that didn't look like I was explaining it, that was really integrated into the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, part of that explanation is actually a shift in mentality during this Cold War mentality of competition, dominance, U.S. dominance, the way that, as Alice says towards the end of the film, where, there's sort of a way of owning this, well, we weren't aggressive, this is just what you do, is a quintessentially post-war American sentiment that I think a newer generation of audience will be surprised to hear people think.
They may be, but I mean, what's very interesting to me is we're back. We're back in the Cold War, and we're back in thinking that we were the good guys and that we are the good guys and that, we have to get our message across to the rest of the world.
When you say these days, how far back are we going? And does the timing of this film, in terms of some of the ideas that you're exploring, have to do with global politics over the past since 2016?
Well, that was I have a wonderful interview with Mark Bradford, which we have much more of it on the DVD. There's actually a DVD. Can you believe it?
Hey.
I know, exactly. Some people have DVD players. But he did that in 2017, and it was very much about the election of 2016 and about, the loss of governance. But I'm also talking about all of a sudden, with the war in the Ukraine, we're back to a relationship with Russia that is not unlike where we were before.
We were in the 60s.
But the role of the art, the way the art are thought, is not in political terms anymore. It's like it's been completely marginalized. What's really surprised me in rewatching it tonight is not only that they thought that American art would be a soft power, create a diplomacy. And in fact, there is another documentary which is called it's a documentary. It's a Belgian documentary. It's coming out soon, and it's about how in the 50s Eisenhower used music to fight Russia through music in North Africa, and and against the African nationalism. So art has completely disappeared as a tool
Yeah.
of diplomacy.
I'm so nostalgic for that. I mean, doesn't it seem amazing that the US thought that art was so important
But
that they
I'm
would
not
use it
sure
for
that it's disappeared, actually. I think that the whole actually, I think that there is an enormous amount of urgency with art these days, and part of it is the idea of power. Um, Power. Well, I mean, that's a big part of the film. One of the opening lines is Christine Massel saying, "Art is not only about art; it's about power." And then towards the end, you have Rauschenberg also saying a quote. He says, "No need for power if there is communication," where he's inverting that.
Well, but that's I think what Christine Massel is talking about and what Rauschenberg are talking about are different things.
Yes.
Because one of the things that Christine Massel said was, our Emperor Louis the 15th knew all about that.
Right.
But what Rauschen's really talking about is that art has the power to change society. It changes people's minds. It changes people's lives. And that's what I believe. And I hope that that's the message of the film. It actually does. And from time to time, governments actually think so too.
Yes. So neither of you think that our governments think that now?
Well, it's very interesting. In one of our screenings, and I'm trying to think, we're in California. One of the people in the audience was with the State Department, and he was really talking about it. I mean, the USIA was disbanded after the fall of the Soviet Union, and art is now it's in the embassies, it's in all different places, and it changes with each administration. And the government only pays for 20% of the Venice Biennale, but they have just paid for a whole Biennale in Doha. So there is a moment when the government is becoming more engaged, but really isn't that engaged unless there's somebody in an embassy who thinks it's very important.
And also, usually, I mean, another thing that strike me is that when government gets involved into something like art, usually they support the establishment, and not the anti-establishment. And in this case, it was the most progressive and new and groundbreaking art, and it's extremely unusual.
Well, I mean, that's really and that was the message was we can do anything here. Any artists are allowed to do anything here. Artists are allowed to complain about their country. Artists are allowed to do anything they want to do. So that's kind of nice.
And that had the roots, actually, the generation before in the abstract expressionist period. There was a precursor to the USIA, which was the CCF, the Congress of Cultural Freedom.
Which was involved with the CIA, yes.
Which was involved with the CIA, and that was supporting and paying for shows at the Museum of Modern Art. And the generation of artists who were enormously influential on Rauschenberg and Johns, like Jackson Pollock, for example, and Ad Reinhardt. But that was very secret. The difference with the USIA was there was an openness. Did you ever find a connection between the two while you were making?
I asked every one of the scholars who've written books about it, who've spent years and years and years in all the archives, and they said they couldn't find a single thing, which didn't mean it wasn't there. Mm-hmm. But in actual fact, now it's our cinematographer, Mead Hunt's father had started the Congress, and he really said they weren't interested in art. Our art was not that important to them. So
fascinating.
Once again,
yeah. Interesting. How did it feel for you to pivot from your last two films were about artists who were alive at the time you made the films, Louise Bourgeois, and then the Kabakovs and Ilya Kabakov. And this film, contributing to your own oeuvre, is clearly documentary. What was that shift like for you?
Well, I did know Rauschenberg when he was alive, and I watched him work. I watched him work with the Soviet poet Wozesensky, and that was kind of interesting, where Rauschenberg was showing him the way. Mm-hmm. That was kind of adorable. But it is very different working with living artists because, for one thing, living artists are they're in control of their work, mm-hmm. And that was a very interesting experience for me. Louise, we interviewed for years and years and years and years. I made that film with Marion Kajori, who is a wonderful filmmaker, and she died in 2006. So we went ahead doing the editing, but she had done all this extraordinary camera work. But Louise never got to see the film. Jerry Gorovoy, who was her manager and assistant and everything like that, would show her parts of it, but she never saw the whole film. Ilya and Amelia saw the Kabakov film and had very strong opinions, and that was a very interesting thing. What I was not prepared for in the Rauschenberg film was the extent of the archival. One of my early producers said to me, "You know, it's going to be 75% archival." I didn't believe him, but it is.
And then oh, sorry.
No, because to the archival you added dramatic reenactment, which is a specific choice, and not and it makes the movie, it gives the movie an edge that it wouldn't. Just an archival piece sometimes doesn't have. Can you talk a little bit about the choice of those reenactments and the boats transporting the paint? Did you kind of fill those gaps and make it more like an adventure?
Well, that was important to me. In fact, I wanted to make a genre film. The Maisel brothers always did that with the Christos. The Pont Neuf was a love story, and Running Fence was a cowboy movie. And I thought that would really work for this. And the genre here is a caper. And I thought it did work for a caper because, it's really interesting. We're not saying whether or not they, did something underhanded. They were marketing. Basically, what they did is they were marketing in a way that nobody knew how to market in those days. That's the underhanded thing they did. But I really wanted to tell that story in a way that was engaging, that audiences would be engaged by, and the black and white is black and white. The archival, and I needed color. And so that's one of the reasons that we did the reenactments of the boat, and we did a soundscape by filming at La Fenice. And that was a way to bring it alive. Very often when you do reenactments, you try to do it in the way it would have been if it were filmed in that time, but then it would have been black and white. So it was very important to have color.
Just out of curiosity, how much did you interact with the Biennale itself, or this was done completely separate from it?
The Biennale does not like documentaries, and they are not very cooperative. So we did as much as we could interacting with them.
But they highly enjoy your film when they saw
it.
Yes.
Yes, so that's a good thing. It's a love story. It's about the Biennale.
My question slipped my mind, so I was wondering if anybody else has one.
This one here. Just if you wait for the mic, so then we can get the audio. Thank you. Oh, here you go.
How did you get Jasper Johns to?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question.
Because he doesn't talk to anybody.
No, I mean I've interviewed him for years, and the last piece I did was for his 70th birthday for the Times, and the word came back that he was unhappy because I was too personal. I got to him, right? But I'd known him for years, and I worked on him really hard. It took 2 years of writing back and forth. And finally he agreed to this. And when I would use to interview him, I had to take notes. He didn't allow anybody to tape him, which I thought was strange because then you get quotes wrong. You should tape somebody when you're interviewing. But he said we could tape him, but that we couldn't film him. And we just wanted to, it was wonderful. He has this farm in Sharon, Connecticut, and he drives around in this little contraption, and we just wanted a photograph of that, but no, because it would have made a precedent. And he was having this big double retrospective coming up, and the last thing he wanted was for journalists to come after him. But I'm very proud of that interview.
I was very impressed with the fact that you were able to shoot this beautiful footage of the Rauschenbergs from MoMA's collection, Bed and Narcissus and Canyon, and they're all in there. Like, how did you get that relationship with Bed? Did MoMA just let you come in and shoot the?
So I don't know how much I should admit here. So that filming all happened at the press preview. They were very cooperative about letting us to come to the press preview and film with everybody else. And so we spent a lot of time at that. But we also spent a lot of time filming these at the SF MoMA, which gave us a lot of time and a lot of cooperation. But Bed, my editor, my wonderful editor, Rob Tinworth, really wanted. There's a new way of filming that you make objects and paintings 3D. And in order to do that, you take lots and lots and lots and lots of photographs. So one day he just went to the MoMA and photographed it
Wow, really? Just like as a guy in the gallery?
as a guy in the gallery.
Wow, that's amazing. It's
so it
incredible
looks
the footage
great.
you have. I mean, really, it's as if you're right on top of the painting. It seems like something they would not allow you to do.
Well, and the other thing is, with the bourgeois film and with Marion, who was a filmmaker long before I was, and our cinematographer Mead Hunt, we film. You film in such a way that you film in, out, you move it. It's wonderful with sculpture, much easier than with painting. To the point that when we showed the bourgeois film, there was a retrospective at the Guggenheim, and the film was at Film Forum, and the Guggenheim said that if you could show a ticket stub, you'd get into the Guggenheim half price, because really you saw the work more intimately than if you were in front of it with your eyes.
Yeah. That's how it felt with Bed as well. I mean, it's especially that is such a legendary object in the history of 20th century art, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a question out there. Hold on for the mic. She's coming.
Oh, it's E.T. Williams.
I was just.
Who is this?
It's E.T. Williams.
Hi. Yeah, Calvin Tompkins is a neighbor of mine in New York, and I was just wondering, how did you get him involved? He was terrific in the show, and I will get in touch with him as soon as I leave here tonight.
Calvin Tompkins is a hero. Calvin Tompkins, he gave us that wonderful interview, and then during COVID, or just after when it started to open up, we still had other questions to ask him, and he gave us a second interview, and then we had to ask him for just a little bit more, and he gave us a third interview, and he's been so supportive in every possible way he could be. He's just a wonderful human being.
April has a question.
I just wanted to thank you so much for doing a film that is exciting and a caper, as you said, a Mad Men caper of, put on by the government, and a few powerful people in the art world, as it was called then, and not just the art market. But I think that the soul of this film ends up being Rauschenberg himself as an artist. And I just wanted to thank you so much for preserving that and letting him embody the message that I think you're conveying, which is about living in a country, wanting to be patriotic, feeling indebted to it, but struggling because it's going in various directions that you don't approve of. And that makes it, I think, very timely for the world today. And I think that you have such a beautiful moral center in this film. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Is that something that you started with in terms of a goal, or did it develop naturally?
April, thank you. And thank you for all the support. You've been an incredible supporter of this film all along. And as everyone here knows, not just of the film, but of art everywhere, here and on the North Fork, where I live. So the moral center of the film is Rauschenberg. And that I knew Rauschenberg, but I had no idea about the depth of his humanity. And that really, that shone through. Irving Sandler was always so upset about all these books about the CIA and the abstract expressionism, because he said the artists weren't doing that. I mean, the artists are the moral center of all of this. And they're the ones that stand out. They're doing their work, and they're doing their work for the reason they're doing it.
Yeah. David,
Right there.
back there.
I'm just curious, Alan Solomon seemed like he was on top of the world and still a fairly young man. So what was his downfall? Why did he sort of fall from grace or just fall out of the picture?
You know, I'm having a hard time finding that in the Jewish Museum archives. There is a letter that says you're not going to return after the Venice Biennale. So I don't know if he'd been spending too much money or he'd been going in a direction. You know, the Jewish Museum is run by it's a religious organization, and he wasn't necessarily showing Jewish artists. I mean, you know, the story about Rauschenberg is that a trustee said, "Oh, I didn't know he was Jewish." And someone said, "Well, he's not." And she said, "Well, thank God for that."
That's great. It's a great story.
So they were going to make they did hire Sam Hunter became the director of the Jewish Museum, but I think they were not thrilled with Alan Solomon. But I think also he was so involved with, and he stayed in Venice all summer. And I think he decided out of that he was going to become a theatrical entrepreneur or something. And he had some great gigs, but it never kind of came to pass. And I don't know what he died of just 6 years later.
As a film person and not an art person, you know, what we see in the film is the Biennale that Win announces a shift from Europe to the United States, from the center of the art world. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that shift meant also in the United States?
Well, I mean, I think that the United States was very chest-pounding about that and very impatient because they felt that all the interesting art was being done here. In fact, Rauschenberg had gone to Paris right after the army because he thought that's where art world was, and within months decided no, it wasn't, you know, and he came back to New York. But there was very exciting stuff happening in New York, and really what was happening in Paris at the time was School of Paris, and they were importing and exporting all over Europe, Max Ernst. But it was pre-war. In many ways, it was pre-war. What happened after the war in Paris was not nearly as interesting as what was happening here. And I think that shift had already happened, and it was the Biennale was only, yes, it's happened. It was the crown of it happening. But one of the things, you know, people ask me, where's the center now? I don't think there is a center. I mean, there might be a market center, but the art world is everywhere. Art is everywhere.
It's an interesting point. Mark?
Thank you. Continuing with that thought that you just mentioned, you know, at the time that this took place, it seemed like the quote unquote art world was a much smaller place. Maybe there were fewer major influencers, but it was also easier for people who were developing their own unique language to be recognized. And as you have done some films about living artists, do you think that there's the same opportunity for artists who are developing their own unique languages to have that recognition, or has the art world or art market become so splintered that it's a completely different dynamic today with maybe other forces that ultimately, commercial forces that ultimately play in what gets recognized as opposed to what happened during the era of Rauschenberg and Leo Castelli?
So, yes, of course, it's splintered. And yes, of course, the market is playing an outsized role. I think there are several art worlds, and there are people who never get the recognition from the big galleries that are doing remarkable work, and people who get the recognition from the big galleries who are doing terrible work. So there's that. So Louise Bourgeois, you know, got no recognition for the longest time. And then she said, of course, that was difficult for her, but she thought it was good too, because she developed in ways she would never have developed. And then two things happened. One of the things that when she was younger, it was Greenbergian. I mean, you had to be doing kind of abstraction that Greenberg thought was the right kind of thing to do. In fact, I saw a really interesting exhibition in Berlin that Boris Greuss had been the curator of, in which he really said that socialist realism and Greenbergian abstraction were both, you couldn't do anything else. That was the only thing you could do. But then two things happened for Louise Bourgeois, and the biggest one was the women's movement, and all of a sudden you could do stories, you could do biography, you could do autobiography, and the women's movement recognized her, and at that point she was recognized. So, I think the art world changes, and the people who are recognized are changed. Well, look at all the Black people and all the women and all the Native Americans who are being recognized now, who were totally ignored. So I think it all changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the scale of the market also has changed enormously, and that's probably the largest shift empirically about the art market since this time period is the actual scale of the market. At that time in 1964, the global scale of the market was estimated in like a couple $100 million at most, and it's now $64 billion a year industry. In New York City alone, in Chelsea alone, actually, there are approximately 520 art galleries in Chelsea, one neighborhood. And if anybody, I wasn't around in the 60s, but you hear about, of course, but I did study, all of this. Actually, I did an independent study in the American art market and its culture for 9 years, and learned a lot about all of these guys. Going back to 1811, the 60s, it was very male dominated, but there were fewer than 20 galleries that were really of consequence. And now, that is and they were all but two owned by men, and then that starts to shift by the 70s, and then by the 80s, you have a more dispersed center with several different locations and nexuses. But the shift, that things are also more transparent now, even though they're not as opaque as most industries. Did you have any challenges with that as a filmmaker? The opacity of the art world, has it presented barriers for you and getting access to information?
Yes. The answer to that is yes.
I think there are benefits though to this shift in the market, which is that it creates opportunity for more artists than ever. As you're saying, there are more artists of color, women, people who were historically excluded from opportunities to exhibit and sell their work that are now finding places in the market.
And then it shifts again. I mean, it's continually shifting, and that's an interesting thing. And also artists from other countries, which is a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. What do you think? Where will this take you, this story? What do you think? Where will you explore next? Do you have an idea of your next film?
I don't.
No?
And and this one too, it develops. You don't know where it's going to go. Also, this one took, the Bourgeois film took me, 14 years. This Kabakov was only 5. This took 7 years. So it's a process.
When you have a film like this, which is, how much do you write in advance, and how much you give yourself the time to find the film through the materials and through what you can or cannot do, and the access that you are given or not?
Well, I think that I think you have to have what you have before you really understand what the film will be. So I think during COVID, it was a very good time to really find out. I had an editor that really didn't understand what I wanted to do, and I really understood that I had to take control of the film and be there for it. And during COVID, I really shaped it and shaped all the scenes in every way I could. And then Rob Tinworth really put in, for one thing, if I wanted to do a caper, you introduce the characters, and they weren't alive. How did you introduce these characters? And he suggested animation. So he was really useful in understanding how to tell this story.
Any other question? Well,
Okay.
I think we.
It's such a great film. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
coming.
Thank you.
Congratulations.